Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about key 3 in the 7 keys to marketing genius. We've already talked about key 1, which is to find your advantage, and key 2, which is to define your purpose. Now we're going to be talking about creating an image. So we've done our homework. Now it's a matter of creating something visual that's going to communicate these first 2 items that we've been talking about. Now, the definition of advertising is to create image and awareness. So you can already see how really working on our image and what that's going to be is going to be very important when we move into the promotional phase, which is next, and particularly advertising. Now, I'll say, and you can probably see when I drew the circles on the board, I'm not really an artist. So I recommend, as we go through these things and we talk about logo designs and things like that, that you consult someone who's good visually, who is an artist, someone who's good at turning these concepts into something visual that they can communicate to other people. We talked a little bit with the vision that people are visually oriented. If you think today, we've got video games, TiVo, DVD, we're just inundated with all these visual elements. Even the internet in the early days was mostly text, and now there's a lot of visual elements to it. So people today are really increasingly visually oriented, and they expect it. The other good thing about, it is a good thing that people are visually oriented in some ways because it's another way for you to connect with them and communicate. But another reason why having something visual in a logo is important is that it's international. So when you go overseas, if you see, I'll use Nike again, the swoosh, or you see the Adidas stripes, or you see Mercedes-Benz logo, whatever it is, logos, they can go over boundaries. You do not need to speak the language to recognize a particular logo. So it's another reason why a logo is very important, and for it to be an actual picture of your product and what it represents. And it's even better if you can somehow build your competitive advantage into your logo. Colors are also very important. And again, I recommend working with someone who really understands how these things work. But even if you're not an artist, you can relate to the fact that if you're driving down the street and every sign is red, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get your bearings and to read the warnings. So if the stop signs are red and the street signs are red and the caution signs are red, it's a little bit more difficult to distinguish. If you think about it though, street signs are green, caution signs are yellow. Every sign has its own particular color scheme that represents something. The same with uniforms, what people wear. Imagine a policeman wearing a pink uniform. That's going to put a little bit different perspective in your mind when you walk up to them. Actually, you probably wouldn't walk up to him. He's like, "Oh, I don't know what's going on here." But even in Beverly Hills and San Francisco, the police officers do not wear pink uniforms. They tend to wear black or dark navy, which connotes authority. And there's a whole science to what colors represent. Different colors represent different things. So, taking this into the realm of marketing, it's very important to choose your colors wisely. If you look at all the promotions for 7 Keys and my company, Marketing Genius, I use a red, black, and white color scheme. Now, I chose these colors because they have impact, and the target, the red, is an element within marketing and is recognized as hitting a target with your marketing. So I chose those particular colors for that reason and to reinforce the idea of marketing. Now, something else that you can do with your brand, and it's a wise thing, is to have anthropomorphic brands. Now, anthro means person or human, and to morph means to change into. So what we're saying is you're giving human-like characteristics to not necessarily a human thing, like a product. Now, there's a few different ways to do this. Now, some companies are actually named after a person, like Ford is named after Henry Ford, or Dell Computers, named after Michael Daehn. Now, this is important because people connect with other people. Now, when we talk about Key 5, we talk about building relationships. We'll get into that more. But people build relationships with other people. They don't build relationships with inanimate objects, at least not strong ones. So it's wise to have a person in your name that represents your company. It's going to make it easier to communicate and connect with your target audience. Another way to do this is to have a personality. I've spoken before about Michael Eisner being representative of Walt Disney, although it is not named after him. Someone else is Bill Gates is a personality that is associated with Microsoft. So typically when you think of Microsoft, or if you hear of Microsoft, or there's an article about Microsoft, you tend to hear also about Bill Gates. This is good for Microsoft because people are going to connect with the idea of Bill Gates as a person. Now, what do you do if you're selling something like toilet paper? Now, toilet paper is not something people really even want to think about, much less build some kind of connection or relationship with. And also it makes it difficult sometimes to really talk about what your product does when you're doing a toilet paper commercial, because nobody wants to see that. So what you see is a Mr. Whipple character who doesn't want you to squeeze his Charmin, although he likes to squeeze it. Sometimes they'll use cuddly dogs or bears to represent the product. And this is a way to use these characters as some kind of personality that you can connect with. Pillsbury Doughboy or the Michelin Man. These are all characters that you can connect with. They represent an image of the company to the consumer. Now, as you're doing these promotions, and as you're creating an image and you're using color, and you're using a particular character, and you have a way that you represent your company, and you've created this brand image, you need to make sure that you're consistent. So as you're using your various marketing promotions, let's say you're doing a magazine ad, and you also have a website, and perhaps you have a television ad, you want to use the same look and feel. If you've got a particular character you're using, you want to use them consistently, same color scheme, the way you talk about your company, going back to your competitive advantage. Make sure that you're communicating it the same way and clearly so that people understand what you're saying and they're not getting confused. Or if they come across your website, it looks completely different than anything else they've seen about your company. They might not even recognize it. So it's very important to be very consistent. I'm going to write an acronym on the board for you here. See if you know what this means. J, A, I, D, K. Got it, right? You know what that stands for? Just another acronym, I don't know. Now, a lot of times people like to throw around acronyms. This is one of my favorites because I throw it on, people look at me like I'm crazy. J-A-A-I-D-K, what are you talking about? Like, well, exactly, just like all the acronyms you used in the sentence you were just speaking to me, I don't know what you're talking about. And there's a tendency when companies are meeting with clients to use industry-specific acronyms that their customers may or may not know. It's also the same thing when doing advertising. A lot of times people will use acronyms that customers are just supposed to understand, and most customers don't have the time or the interest to really even find out what those acronyms represent. Now, a few years ago, I was talking with an artist that was starting a new company, and he wanted to call it UMG. So I began a dialogue with him, and I was trying to explain to him why using acronyms to name your company, particularly a startup company that nobody's ever heard of before, wasn't necessarily a good idea. And he sent me back an image of the U and the M and the G written a certain way and said, yeah, well, this is my logo and this is what I'm going to call my company. But you see, it's a special font and these letters look a special, unique way. I said, well, okay, I understand that is a neat look that you have there, but again, the same principle applies. People are going to see this and they're not going to know what UMG stands for. So I told him it was probably wise to change it, and he said, well, I just didn't understand art. And that's fine, and perhaps today you know what UMG stands for, but if not, then the point is well taken. So please learn from my friend that used UMG to represent his company. And when you're naming your company, don't use initials. Now, if by chance your customers start to refer to you by a nickname or by initials, that's fine. Actually, it's good. It means they've actually built some kind of relationship or rapport with you. But it's your responsibility to have something that's unique and personal that can really connect with them and that they can understand up front. Another thing I would caution you against is using numbers for the name of your product or your company. I use a Palm Pilot, a PDA, and I used to sell them actually. Now in the store we had Palm 5s, which was a Roman numeral, so a V. We had also, they came out with Palm 500s, they came out with Palm 505s, came out with Palm 100s. Now the problem is when people came in the store to look at these different things, they didn't really understand what was what. Is 100 better than 500, or is 500 better than 100? And is that a V or is that a 5? So what I would say is when you're naming your product, use some kind of name. Partly because, as we said before, people connect with some kind of personality, even when it comes to an object. Some kind of a name is going to do better than some kind of random number. Plus, it confuses your customers. Even I had people coming into the store to buy that product. They were confused by all the different names and numbers. Now, I was encouraged that Palm changed their strategy a bit, and they came out with a new line of new palms, and they called them things like tungsten and Zyre. And I was like, all right, great. Maybe they read my book. They're starting to pick up on this, that people really get connected with the name, and at least they can differentiate it from the other products based on its name rather than some random number. Well, it wasn't too long after that they came out with the Tungsten C and the Zyre 73, which is better than the Zyre 1. And actually, I can't remember all the numbers anymore. Because even for me as a salesman, it was confusing what was what. I could definitely tell you that the people trying to buy the product were very confused by all this. So the lesson to learn is use a name for your products. Don't use numbers. Another thing to remember is not to mix numbers in with your name. It's very confusing. Now think about it. Is it easier to remember your phone number or your license plate? Now for most people, they can remember their phone number easier. There's something about the brain that can remember a series of numbers easier than it can remember a series of numbers and random letters put together. So when you're doing a website, it can be very confusing. Like for my book website, The 7 Keys to Marketing Genius, I have 7keysmarketing.com. When I would tell people that, they would say, is it the number 7 or is it spelled 7? Now, what I had bought was the spelled out word 7, but I went back and I bought the number 7, keysmarketing.com. So I have both. So regardless of what people type in, the number 7 or written out 7, they're going to find my website. And it was worth the $10 to buy that domain name, not to lose all the people that had typed that in and might get frustrated and say, I really don't care that much anyway. Now, your image, which also some people refer to as your brand, is very important. It's one of the most important, if not the most important asset you have for your product or company. There's great benefit in partnering with other people, other organizations, or other products. Like sometimes you might see a cake mix, Duncan Hines cake mix with Hershey syrup. Now that's a partnership, and you're actually getting some benefit because you have the brand Hershey's chocolate, and you've got the brand of Duncan Hines cake coming together, and it seems like a great idea. And I would say, in the right circumstances, it is a great idea, and those are two very stable companies. The only problem is you might have somebody who wants to buy the cake mix. They love Duncan Hines cake mix. Big fan. They hate Hershey's syrup, or they hate Hershey's chocolate. So because it says Hershey's, they're not going to buy your product. So there can be some drawbacks. Now that's rather minimal, and that's usually worth it because in general, that kind of partnership is going to bring you more loyalty from the two sides, from the chocolate and from the cake mix. Usually a problem occurs when one of the partners in the relationship does something bad. So let's say, for instance, and this has not happened, Hershey's goes bankrupt or Hershey's has a bad batch of chocolate. Duncan Hines' fate is really tied in with the way Hershey's runs their company. Now, again, those are both two good companies, and something like that probably would never happen. But when you're working with your company, you need to be very careful on who you partner with. Yeah, there's some great advantages in working together. You can really pool your resources, and you can benefit from the market that each one of you brings to the table. On the other hand, if it goes wrong, or your partner does something unethical, or there's something wrong with their product, you're really tied in with them, and that's going to reflect poorly on your product. So the message of this is to really choose carefully who you partner with. And I liken it to a marriage. I mean, some marriages are great and some marriages are terrible. It really depends on what two people you're putting together. If you put the right two people together, it's going to be a great marriage. They're really going to grow. They're two healthy people and they're going to move forward. But if you put two unhealthy people together, or one healthy person and one really messed up person, it's going to end in an ugly and nasty divorce. So if you can get a great partnership, I definitely would recommend it. But don't take it lightly. It's a very serious situation when you partner with other people. It can really affect your image in the marketplace. Now, a great way to think of brand or image is to think of it as a promise. What your brand is, what your image is in the marketplace, is a promise to your consumers of what you're going to do and what you're going to provide. Now, a few years back, I guess more than a few years back, maybe I'm dating myself, there was a generic aisle at the grocery store. So I remember going with my mom, and there's a whole aisle of black and white products that just had plain labels written on there, things like white cans with black letters that said beer, or I remember I got a bag of jelly beans that just white and black letters that said jelly beans. Very generic. Now, advantage of buying a brand name product, let's say toothpaste. If I go down the toothpaste aisle and I see Crest, I know what Crest is. I know what they say they can do. I know what they're promising. They spend a lot of money educating me and making a certain promise of what they're going to deliver to me. Now, when I buy a non-branded product, I don't have the same product. And in some ways, I'm taking a risk because I'm not sure exactly what that's going to deliver. So, in a way, the promise that your brand is making is providing time and convenience for the person that's purchasing it. Because I can go down the aisle and try 20 different toothpastes, or I can go with the brand that I know what it is and I know what it represents. In a lot of ways, it's going to save me time. Or another way you can look at it is I'm going to pick up the generic and look at it and read all the ingredients, and is that the same thing that's in Crest because I know what Crest is. Your brand is really promising on what you're going to deliver. So let's go back to the generics, the generic aisle. Now, we don't see that at the grocery store anymore. The reason is there's nothing to compare it to. When you go in the store now, they do have generics, but they're positioned right next to the brand because the brand really explains what the product is going to provide for you. It's making a promise of what it's going to deliver. And when you have a totally generic product, you're not really sure what it is or what it's promising to do. So the grocery store has changed. All the stores have changed. So they're actually positioning generic products right next to the brand name products. But another change has occurred. Instead of having these black and white labels with no branding whatsoever, now you have store brands. So things like President's Choice, President's Select, depending on what store you're in. There tends to be a generic brand, or even Walgreens has their own brand. But it's not just generic, it actually has a name on it. And in that sense, you are getting a brand because that means Walgreens is standing behind this product. And Walgreens in general is making some kind of promise and some kind of commitment to you that they're going to deliver a certain amount of quality and stand behind their product. So, bottom line, brands are promises, and it's an explanation of what they're going to do for your consumers. Now, whenever possible, try to have a word that represents your product. Now, there's some companies that have done this really successfully, and part of it is due to the product and the name they've chosen, and some of it has to do with their marketing. But if I say Kleenex, you know what I'm talking about, or ping pong, are Band-Aid, iPod, eBay. These are companies that have done very well at promoting themselves and explaining what they represent. So much so that they become synonymous with the product itself. A lot of people don't even know that these are brand names. They'll say, give me a Kleenex, when actually it's a facial tissue. But Kleenex has done such a good job of branding itself, people don't know it's a brand name. Same with ping pong. Ping pong is actually a brand name for table tennis, and Band-Aid is for the adhesive strips. And of course, iPod and eBay are newer, but they've actually represent a category in our minds now. And that's a great thing for marketers when you can become synonymous with the actual product category. Now here's something to stay away from. Line extensions. Now, what is a line extension? That's when you take a well-known product like, let's say, Coke or Oreos, and you begin to use the same exact name with other product combinations. So if you go to the grocery aisle today, there's, I don't know how many different brands of Oreos. It becomes very confusing for your consumers as to what an Oreo is. So there's the shopping list test. If I gave somebody a shopping list and I write on their Oreos, would they be able to come back with a package of Oreos? Probably not, because they're like, well, do you want the peanut butter vanilla Oreos? Do you want the mint chocolate Oreos? Do you want the double stuffed Oreos? Do you want the... And that creates a problem in the mind of your consumer, and it actually cannibalizes the market share of your original product. Now, when they've done studies on products like this, and they've done studies on line extensions, almost without exception, they cannibalize the original product by using the same exact name. Think of Coke. I mean, obviously they have Diet Coke and things like that now, but what if instead of Sprite, it was Lemon Lime Coke? Now, it sounds weird to us today, but for some reason there's a huge proliferation of line extensions today, and I believe if they came out with that flavor today, it probably would be Lemon Lime Coke. For some reason, they have not learned that line extensions do not work. But why is this so? Why do so many people do line extensions even though they don't really work? Well, there's a few reasons. One is they haven't done their homework. They haven't read my book. They haven't read some of the other books or the research on the market that shows that line extensions don't truly work. The other is ego. People say, hey, I've got this great brand here. I've got Oreo, or I've got Coke, or Budweiser, or whatever it is, and this is the best there is, and all I got to do is just slap another name on it, create a new line from that, and people are going to buy it. So it has to do with people's ego and thinking they can really do whatever they want, that the 7 keys do not apply to them, that marketing principles in general do not apply to them or their company. Another reason why line extensions appear to work is that their competition is doing the exact same thing. So if you look at something like Diet Coke, which really has been very successful, part of the reason why is if you look at that market, their competition is doing the exact same thing. Pepsi has Diet Pepsi. So it's line extension going against line extension. So nobody really has the advantage. But what we're talking about is being smart with your marketing, increasing your marketing IQ, and coming up with ways you could really get into that market and take it over. And one way, if you want to really take over that market, well, you probably need a lot of money for one thing because it's a pretty huge market and you're going up against some heavy players. But it could be done if you came in with a cola that was specifically a diet cola but had its own unique name. And you focus specifically on that. You could take market share away from Diet Coke because Diet Coke is a Coke line extension. The other problem with line extensions and why people tend to do them is that they appear successful. Because usually when a line extension comes out, like a new flavor of Oreo or a new flavor of Coke, people do buy it initially because they are curious and they want to see what this is about, and they'll begin to buy the product. So the sales go up. But if you look at the research in the long term, sales go down. And sometimes it actually goes down far enough where the original core product has less sales than it did originally. the other reason why people do line extensions is they think that it's going to be cost effective and less expensive to promote a new version of an old product because they do not have to get freshly into the mind of the consumer. But that's not really true. If you're somebody like Coke or perhaps you, marketing genius, with your product that you're promoting, is it really less expensive to spend $100 million on a line extension, or in your case, $1,000 on a line extension, than to come up with a new product and a new name and to spend that same amount of money? You're not really going to spend any less money promoting a line extension than you are a new name for a new product that's going to do the same thing. Now, the main problem with the line extension is it confuses your customers. They don't know what your product is anymore. You have the same name on 10, 20 different products. One example of this is the V8 Splash. Now, since I was a kid, I've been seeing these V8 commercials, which has somebody going to the refrigerator and getting a drink and then saying, oh, there's V8 juice in there. And they go, oh, I could have had a V8. And they hit their head. Very successful campaign. A lot of people are familiar with that. I grew up with it in my childhood. And V8 is like a tomatoey drink, like vegetables and mostly tomato. It tastes like tomato to me. Now, a few years ago, V8 decided to come out with a fruit beverage line, I guess like orange juice and pineapple juices and things like that, that were blends, and they called it V8 Splash. Now, the problem was these kind of sweet juices, like, pineapple and orange and things like that, taste nothing like this tomatoey juice. It's totally different. It's a line extension. Then, I guess seeing the problem that people were confused about what V8 was and people didn't want to try V8 Splash, perhaps because they thought it was going to taste tomatoey and they were looking for a sweet juice drink, they came out with commercials that had people drinking V8 Splash, and to their surprise, there was no tomatoey aftertaste. So what V8 Splash was doing was spending, tens, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars trying to teach people and promote to people that V8 was not a tomatoey drink. It was a sweet drink. So I think this is a great example of line extension and what not to do. You're totally confusing your customers as to what your product means, and you're spending tons of money trying to teach people to not think of your product of what you spent so much money trying to teach them it was in the first place. And when we're talking about marketing, there's so many different things you can do with your product. There's so many different directions you can go with your marketing and your promotion. The best thing to do is to narrow your focus. Really narrow your focus. That's part of what Key 1 was in finding your competitive advantage. Because first you wrote out a list of strengths. And typically people want to tell customers every single strength that they have before they can even answer or even have a chance to listen to you. You've said 10 things that you can do. But you really need to focus and narrow it on the one particular thing that's going to make a difference, that one particular competitive advantage that's really going to make your product valuable to them. Think of it like a magnifying glass. And the rays of the sun are coming down, and it's pretty warm and it feels nice, but if you take that magnifying glass and you really focus that energy into a strong beam of light, you can burn things. It's the same thing you want to do with the focus of your organization, with your marketing. When you're defining your purpose for your company and your competitive advantage, you want them all to be very focused and narrow on one particular promotion, one particular message that you're communicating to people. So when we're talking about creating an image, we're talking about your brand, and just remember that this, in many ways, is the greatest asset, because this is what you represent in the mind of your consumers, is what your brand image is. Now, one thing I hear people say is any publicity is good publicity. And I would have to disagree with that. There's some very well-known people like Adolf Hitler, Charlie Manson, Joseph Stalin. These are mass murderers. These are terrible people. They're very well known, but they're known for the wrong thing. So I would say when you do your marketing promotions, when you're getting into the public, don't just get your name out there, which is what I hear people saying. Get the right name out there, get the right message out there, because you want to be famous. The name for people being known for the wrong thing is the opposite of that. It's called infamy. So you really want to make sure that you've tailored your image right, that you understand the message you want to communicate to people. And guess what? We're ready for key 4 to actually implement our promotions. And that's what we'll talk about next time.